Hi, my name is Julian Chambliss. Welcome to the third annual Hannibal Square Community Land Trust Juneteenth Celebration. I am a former advisory board member and former board member for the Hannibal Square Community Land Trust. I'm going to be here and we're going to have a discussion about uh, gentrification and African Americans. Of course, this makes perfect sense in the context of the history of Juneteenth, because of course, one of the things that defined African American experience as we were coming out of the Civil War was a search for property and a search for freedom associated with property. In many ways, the land trust is a contemporary manifestation of that. My colleague, Dr. Igor Vonovich, will be our keynote speaker for this presentation. He'll also give a presentation, we'll have a conversation. Igor will be talking, as I say, about African American land and gentrification and the processes behind that, and what we need to think about when we think about the process of transformation in heritage communities around the country and around the world. So thank you so much. And before we do that, there will be two videos that we'll be looking at, one from our sponsor, City National Bank, and another sort of telling a little bit about what the land trust is. So stay tuned.
Communities past, should we just let the market determine its? How has history shaped where we live? When redlining molds a community's past, should we just let the market determine its future? How do we preserve the character of neighborhoods, create sustainable communities for all people, and address the disparity in generational wealth among white, black, and brown Americans? In 2004, the Hannibal Square Community Land Trust was formed to help answer these questions after residents of the west side of Winter Park organized to voice their concerns about a land grab that had been taking place in the historically black Hannibal Square area. The area had long been targeted by speculators who built high-priced homes and businesses that squeezed out existing residents. For our first project, we built 10 homes for working families in a neighborhood on the verge of erasure.
Hannibal Square in Winter Park is a neighborhood in Winter Park that's predominantly African American. And Hannibal Square started with its roots in the 1800s, right after Reconstruction. Basically, many African Americans who were the formerly enslaved moved from Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and moved into Florida, and specifically Central Florida, because Central Florida area did not have a slave culture. And so they moved into the area, and there were some wealthy white citizens who provided the opportunity to purchase land. And they purchased small parcels, and the story goes that families would buy parcels of land. They were small, typically less than 5,000 square feet. And then at night, the Pullman porters and the butlers and the field workers would gather together, and they'd all work at night to build one home, and the women would cook, and they would all build one home throughout several months, finish that one, and then after they leave their jobs, for the next set, they would build the next set of homes. And so they would build their homes at night. And they ended up having a whole community, which is now called Hannibal Square, of quite a number of homes that were owned by African Americans. And really what is one of the little known history facts is that without that community, Winter Park would not have gotten its incorporated as a city. Winter Park needed to have at least 100 landowners sign the petition to the state to become incorporated. They only had about 42, 43 white landowners. They had huge parcels of land, but there were not enough. And so right across the railroad tracks in Hannibal Square, there were well over 60 some odd African-American landowners that needed to sign the petition with the white landowners for Winter Park to become incorporated. And so you have Gus Henderson, who was one of the well-respected residents of the Hannibal Square area of Winter Park, who really gathered together all of these property owners in Hannibal Square to come across the railroad tracks and sign a petition so that Winter Park could become incorporated. And what they asked for was representation on the council. And so the agreement was they become incorporated, and Walter B. Simpson and Frank R. Israel would become the first two council people. So that happened in the late 1890s. And then within 3 years of that, Winter Park petitioned to have Hannibal Square removed from the city limits because they were concerned that there were so many more black landowners than white landowners, and those two city councilmen were removed from the council, and Winter Park has not had an African American representation on the council since.
We built a road between these homes and named it after Winter Park's first and only Black City Council representatives. Since then, we've continued to build in Winter Park. The land trust model allows qualified buyers to purchase homes without encumbering the cost of the land. This model ensures that cost savings, inflation control, and positive equity are carried into the future so that these homes will be affordable for generations to come.
When you buy a land trust home, as opposed to a fee simple home, you basically buy the improvements, everything above the ground, and then you don't buy the land. And so typically with a fair market house, you buy land plus house is the home. With a CLT home, it's home minus land makes it affordable. So the land value is taken out of the equation. And so that now you're just buying the structure and you lease the land in a 99-year ground lease. And so what that ground lease says is you have exclusive rights to that land for 99 years and you can renew it for another 99 years. And no one else can have that. That allows you to be able to have your 30-year mortgage and still the land lease outlasts that. The other thing that's nice about a CLT is that every homeowner is a member of the CLT. So that land is owned by all of the homeowners in common. And it's just kept exclusively to make sure that things stay affordable. In Winter Park, for example, land value for a small 6,000 square foot parcel is probably about $200,000. But that's no longer in the equation when you buy a house in the CLT.
In the years since our founding, we've helped to keep families stable and served as a defense against gentrification in Winter Park, and we are excited to continue this work all over Central Florida.
And I'm the Vice President and Community Development Manager. Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Colley, and I'm the Vice President and Community Development Manager for City National Bank of Florida. We are proud to sponsor Hannibal Square Community Land Trust and tonight's Juneteenth celebration. Since its inception over 70 years ago, City National Bank has dedicated our time and efforts to the communities that we serve. We partner with nonprofit organizations who work with youth, financial literacy, small business owners, and promote home ownership. Today, we think about how far our country has come and how far we still have to go to promote racial equality and diversity. We look forward to working with each of you as we strive towards a legacy of inclusion. Thank you and have a great night.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gigi Mormon, and I am a board member at Hannibal Square Community Land Trust. Our first giveaway tonight will come from our friends at Writer's Block Bookstore with locations on Park Avenue in Winter Park and in downtown Winter Garden. In the spirit of celebrating Juneteenth, they've donated 2 tote bags of books featuring Black authors, one for adult readers and another one for young adult readers. The winner of the bag for adult readers is, let me see if I can get a drum roll going and we can get excited on a Friday night. The winner is going to be Camille. What do we got? Who's our winner? Let me take a look and see if I've gotten the happy message saying who our winner is. So we're giving away 2. We're giving away one bag of adult reader books, and the second one is going to be a bag for young adults. So I'm seeing a winner of Philip D. Toledo. Philip De Toledo is one of our winners, and our second winner for the book bag is going to be, let's see if we can draw his name out of a hat. So this is from people that have RSVP'd for the event, but there will definitely be an opportunity for you to win something by going on to the Hannibal Square CLT.org website and logging into the registration so that way you can make sure that you have a chance to win some of the other prizes that we'll be doing tonight. So Philip won our adult reader's bag, and then the second bag is going to go to, let's see if we've got a name. And thank you guys for tuning in on a Friday night. We really appreciate you spending time with us. And so we will make sure that we are not delaying the real conversation. But the second winner is Winnetka Holland. So we will make sure that Philip D. Toledo and Winnetka Holland, and I apologize for butchering your names, that the two of you receive your packages from the Writer's Block Bookstore. As a member of Hannibal Square Community Land Trust, I'm proud to help provide quality, affordable housing for working families in Central Florida. We'd like to share more details about the projects that we have planned, so take a look at this video and hopefully you'll connect with us to help us build more projects similar to this one. Orange Center project will consist of 30 townhomes. Our Orange Center project will consist of 30 townhomes, 28 affordable apartments, and over 15,000 square feet of retail space for local businesses. This development plan will not only provide housing for working families, but the commercial space will serve as a place to cultivate success for their futures through entrepreneurship and education opportunities. Our project in Apopka will allow us to build another 24 townhomes. We're proud to provide affordable homes and stability for working families. Hannibal Square Community Land Trust has given our homeowners an opportunity to build wealth through equity. Our land trust model assures that our homes will remain affordable upon resale, offering protection against inflation to prevent the gentrification of our neighborhoods.
In today's economy, it is getting harder and harder for affordable housing developers to build an affordable home, because the construction price is a construction price, and construction prices are skyrocketing at this point. We are very appreciative of our banking partners who have helped to provide down payment assistance to help make homes affordable. But if there are philanthropists, if there are government entities, if there are businesses who can actually help with offsetting the construction costs so that we can actually build these homes, that would be huge.
To learn more about how to apply or how to support Hannibal Square Community Land Trust, contact us today or visit us at hannibalsquareclt.org. So whether you're interested in owning a home or wanting to make a difference through volunteering or donating, we invite you to join us.
Hannibal Square benefits from our partnerships. That is what keeps us going. We are a community-based organization. We are a nonprofit, so we need our partnerships. So we always look for volunteers to help us. If you have skills in construction financing, if you have skills in counseling or basically teaching people how to maintain their homes, if you have any of those types of skills, we definitely want you here. We need you to help us with our homeowners. If you are a corporation and you have employees that are basically the average working person in Central Florida and they can't find a home, we need your participation. Maybe you can help with down payment assistance to your employees so they can get into a home. If you are just an individual who wants to be a part, we have community programs. We do neighborhood cleanups. We do house painting. We do, quite a number of things like that, events that promote the organization and also promote the community. We want you to participate because it definitely helps us to get the word out about what we do, and it also helps us to be able to continue our mission.
I will just add to that by encouraging you to visit our website, to, like Camille said, our executive director, Camille, to volunteer, to donate, to partner. The donations that we receive for our 501c3 help to continue our work in providing quality, affordable housing. We also are helping to stem the tide of gentrification and build intergenerational wealth among a diverse array of working families. Now, remember, there is going to be one lucky donor tonight who will receive a $250 Amazon gift card from our title sponsor, City National Bank. So thank you again to City National Bank for partnering with us on this event so that we could have our Juneteenth celebration with all of you. Before we begin our discussion, and I know you're anxious to hear from Dr. Igor and Dr. Julian, we have another door prize that we're going to give away. So this prize is an Amazon Echo Dot, and it was donated by iConnect Real Estate. So the winner of that prize, let's see if I can get a name in there, Ben Gentle will be the winner of the Amazon Echo Dot. So we'll be sending you an email, Ben, to arrange mailing off your prize. As you watch our discussion tonight, please think of questions that you'd like to ask our speakers and post them in the chat session, either on Facebook or on StreamYard or on YouTube. We are giving away 3 $50 Uber Eats cards. Who couldn't use those? And those will be courtesy of our main sponsor, City National Bank. So if your question is one of the first 3 selected, we will definitely be mailing out those email cards to you. So without further ado, here's Dr. Julian Chambliss.
Thanks, Gigi. Excuse me. It's my great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Igor Bonovich, who is the professor and intern director of the Global Urban Studies program here at Michigan State University. Igor holds appointments in the Department of Geography, Environment, Spatial Sciences, and the School of Planning, Design, and Construction. He has worked in government and in private practice as a policy analyst and a planner. His main area of research focus on urban redevelopment processes and the study of the resulting social, economic, and built environment impacts. This is a great opportunity for us to hear from an expert who can tell us a lot about gentrification and the racial and social political dimensions to it. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. V. Thank you so much.
Good evening, all. Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting. So my presentation is on African American communities and gentrification. And I've got a presentation here. I'm going to have to just share the screen first, get the presentation up. And I want to make sure that everyone sees it. Can everyone see this presentation? Julian, do you see it? Do you see the presentation, Julian? Okay, so African American communities and gentrification, this was an interest since I moved, for myself, since I moved into the US. And I'm gonna go through a couple of projects, case studies that I've worked on, some by myself, some with my students over the years while here at Michigan State University. And it's gonna be a big picture perspective. One of the things that I wanna point out is that these processes are happening across US cities, and it's affecting all of us. What we see in the late 20th century is a whole new appreciation emerge for urban lifestyles again. And there was considerable emphasis placed on redevelopment and revitalizing city centers. And this was in sharp contrast to what was happening in the immediate post-World War II years, where the emphasis, whether private or even through government policy, was placed on suburbanization. People were moving out of cities, the tax base was moving out of cities, and it was actually generating urban disinvestment and decline within the urban cores themselves. Perhaps a classic example is shown with New York City. And if you reflect on the city in the early 70s, it was going through this massive process of decline. And into the early 21st century, over the next 4 or 5 decades, it essentially became a playpen for the rich. It's unaffordable to the majority of the population. This is just an article back from 2016 pointing out the New York average condo prices are around 3.2 million. This is for like an 800 square foot condo. Even if you have $700,000 to put down, once you consider your mortgage, once you consider the maintenance fees, once you consider the property taxes, you're looking at about a payment of about $15,000 to $20,000 per month, which for even upper income groups is generally unaffordable. Now, this isn't only happening in New York City. We see this in Boston. We see this in San Francisco. We see this in Washington, D.C. It's widespread. And we recognize it as the process of gentrification. The term was coined by Ruth Glass in her study of London in 1964, and she was noticing that new middle class, young urban professionals, school teachers, nurses, professors, were moving into working class neighborhoods and renovating, refurbishing the buildings, and slowly pushing the populations out. Now, the process is far more complex. We have gay men. We have research showing gay men as drivers of gentrification, artists as gentrifiers throughout New York City, throughout San Francisco, Toronto, Vancouver, higher education institutions, studentification. Around universities, neighborhoods are being gentrified. And also, of course, preservation of historic homes. Classic examples in Philadelphia, in Chicago. Now, there are two dimensions that become critically important when reflecting on gentrification. How do you define it, given that it's so complicated? Well, one is capital reinvestment into the built environment, the physical upgrading itself. The second dimension of gentrification is displacement. The displacement of traditional local populations by a population of higher socioeconomic status. And I will look at two neighborhoods within this case study, within this presentation as case study contexts. Lincoln Park in Chicago and Freedmanstown in Houston. Now, when it comes to preservation, when it comes to preserving heritage, on the one hand, a lot of people will focus on the built environment, but the cultural, social, the population itself becomes critical. And in this debate, there have been many that have advocated for gentrification. Classic example, Andre Douani's 2001 article, 3 Cheers for Gentrification, where he's actually advocating it. And there are many critics that see the upheaval generated by this predator-prey relationship in the housing market as being fundamentally problematic. In some of the early discussions on gentrification, Michael DeHaven Newsom, who's a law professor and specializing in heritage law, pointed out the problems, the pressures placed on Black communities. And it was in an article called Blacks in Historic Preservation. And he talked about a high fashion neighborhood in Washington, D.C. And he says, consider by way of example, Georgetown, a predominantly white enclave populated by the white aristocracy. Its reputation as a chic, expensive place to live is well known. The trouble is that we used to live there too, until the historical preservationists in league with the real estate developers decided that Georgetown's historic value was ripe for takeover. Now, there are many neighborhoods across the US that are characterized by similar processes. And one is Chicago's Lincoln Park. This was once a red line community, a red line neighborhood. And into the 1960s, the new middle class began moving into this area, attracted by the affordable housing and also by the historical quality of the homes. It actually became one of the most active National Register historic districts in the city, and which is, a complete contrast to the conditions of the neighborhood in 1960 when it housed some of the poorest residents in Chicago. The new middle class, young urban professionals began moving into the neighborhood during the 1960s. And by the 1970s, they started to organize historic preservation conferences. And it was very clear what they were trying to do. This is an example from the very first one, Preservation for Tomorrow, It was a 1972 conference. And you can see from their brochure what they were trying to achieve. Up here, you can see it says, it works in New Orleans, it works in Charleston, it works in Savannah, it works in New York, it can work in Chicago. Attend the first conference on historic landmark preservation in Lincoln Park. So you understand from very early in the process that there was considerable interest in fundamentally changing, upgrading the neighborhoods. Currently, Lincoln Park contains 24% of all preservation counts in the city of Chicago. This is the highest concentration of preservation activity. And even by 1975, there was an article written in the Chicago Tribune called Old Neighborhood Gets a People Lift. There goes the neighborhood revitalized, talking about how heritage was used to upgrade Lincoln Park. And you can see some of the houses that were particularly appealing to the new middle class moving in. I want to show you some basic sociodemographic patterns, the changes that took place in the city between 1970 and 2000. Here we have a map of Chicago, and you can see the north side of the city. This is showing personal income. The north side of the city has particularly high increases in income levels. The darkest census tracts represent income increases, personal income increases from between 40 to about 75,000, whereas the light gray tracts, the lightest gray color, shows actual declines in income. And you can see large segments of the city are actually experiencing declines in incomes, but there are these tracts in the north part of the city along the lakeshore that are just exploding. And you'll see in terms of property values, in terms of household income. In terms of the sociodemographic makeup, in Lincoln Park between 1970 and 2000, the African-American population declined by almost 60%. Over the same period, the Hispanic population, which was also an important component of the neighborhood, declined by 95%. The African American and Hispanic population in 1970 made up 51% of Lincoln Park. By 2000, they made up only 18%, and it continued to decline. So on the one hand, we had this dramatic displacement of the local population. And along with it went the ethnic and racial heritage, which was simply erased, which was lost. But in addition to that, what we had over time was simply the wiping out of the built environment as well. Some of the attractive houses which were retained were refurbished and sold off, and people renovated them and preserved them. But when it came to the more working class homes, the houses without much detail, there was really no interest in keeping them. So you can see actually in this advertisement here, they're selling this property really for the purposes of it to be torn down. And there's a sign here showing images of the type of mansions that could be built. And here's an example of a faux historic mega mansion in Lincoln Park that has no links to the history of the neighborhood. Here are two other examples: a contemporary home, which replaced a traditional structure within the neighborhood, and then a neoclassical new build. And some of these neoclassical new builds will actually sell for $10, $20 million. So fundamental transformation is occurring where over time, even the wealthy are being pushed out of the neighborhood. In terms of some of the other socioeconomic variables, per capita income in Lincoln Park between 1970 to 2000 increased by almost 800%. The number of professionals over these 3 decades increased by over 700%, while the number of manufacturing workers declined by 68%. At the same time, the median value of a dwelling increased by 660%. This is considered kind of the pinnacle of gentrification in Lincoln Park. Now, a contrasting picture of gentrification is shown by Freedmanstown. This is the African-American Mother Ward in Houston, in the 4th Ward. African-Americans began developing the area after emancipation in 1865, and it was considered the most significant cultural community in Houston. And this was when I arrived to Texas, when I started teaching at Texas A&M, it was in the late 1990s. And at this point, everything coming from the municipal government was about preserving local heritage, preserving local culture. And yet the local government became very active in actually erasing this community. So you can see the type of homes that existed in Freedmanstown, and you can see the neighborhood is very much in the shadows of the downtown. Displacement of the African-American community started back in the 1920s, and it was decades of fighting. And what was attractive for the city and for the investors was the proximity of the neighborhood to the downtown. In the early 2000s, a Main Street coalition, which involved the government, put out a report, and it stated that to create the highest quality urban spaces along Main Street and to establish a positive climate for redevelopment, the local revival initiatives must eliminate blight and remove negative signs of disorder. So you might ask, what is this blight and what are these negative signs of disorder? Well, it was Freedmanstown, but it was not only Freedmanstown. There were also other ethnic communities that were also erased in these renewal initiatives, including Chinatown, including Little Saigon. So these are the typical shotgun shacks that were prevalent in Freedmanstown. So you can see here's the downtown, and Freedmanstown is right next to it. And initially, when the government started talking, when developers started talking about redeveloping the neighborhood, there were all these imaginaries of Black urban spaces that really the city leaders had no interest in reproducing. So the images that were being put out by developers and the city of Houston were showing a renewed Freedmanstown that was very much expected to be occupied by the African-American community. And that was simply not the case. There was a large-scale purchasing of the houses, including with the help of the city of Houston. The buildings were boarded up, fenced in, large-scale demolishment and replacement of the structures. There was really no interest in preserving much of the original neighborhood. You can see historic Houston here. Here's a sign by local protesters who were fighting these renewal efforts over decades, in fact. The local church was demolished, and you can see the new development coming in. It had really no association with the heritage of the site. Here's the example. These were 3 of the apartment structures. There was a whole row of them along this block, the last 3 remaining ones. And these are new condos and row houses being put into the neighborhood as the neighborhood was completely erased. So here's this is the change in the median value of housing. And the white area shows highest levels of increase. The Black area shows decreases. So what you see, the urban core, this is going from 1980 to 2000. From 1980 to 2000, the value of housing in the urban core is increasing. And what is happening is that ethnic groups are being pushed to the inner suburbs. And then the wealthy whites are also suburbanizing. So it's a reversal of what happened in the immediate post-World War II period, in that the wealthy are returning back into the city, taking over the urban core, pushing ethnic groups and poorer populations into the old inner suburbs, while at the same time a group of people who prefer suburbs are still decentralizing outward from the city. This is percent change in median household income. And again, the white and the light gray shows the highest percent increase. And you can see the increases are highest in the urban core, including in Freedmanstown, and they're declining in the inner suburbs. And finally, change in percent of family living below poverty. And this is reversed. Declines in poverty are shown by the darker colors. So you can see there's high levels of declines in poverty within the urban core. But then within the inner suburbs, you have increases in poverty levels. Typical displacement pressure, typical social and physical upgrading. Between 1980 to 2000, 75% of the population in Freedmanstown was lost. There was a decline in the Black population of 85.5%, while the white population was increased by 30%. There was significant increases in median household income and per capita income around 126% or so, and massive movement of white professionals, young urban white professionals now into the neighborhood. You can see here some of the remaining structures being surrounded by the new developments, but much of this is gone now. One of the things I wanted to point out within the larger picture context is here's Freedmanstown. But as I said, it's not only Freedmanstown that was erased, it was a whole series of other ethnic groups that were erased from the urban core. And this is a large area, 54 census tracts, making up some 75 square kilometers that is being gentrified. So this is roughly about 3/5 to 2/3 the size of the city of Boston or the city of San Francisco, where these type of processes are taking place in Houston over this 2-decade period from 1980 to 2000. And again, Freedmanstown was erased, but the target was very much all ethnic communities within the urban core. Chinatown, Little Saigon, there was a Mexican neighborhood where that was also displaced in this renewal process of the urban core. So what we see is this kind of is a very much a standardized process across major US city of erasing the poor, erasing minority populations, as the wealthy, who traditionally in the immediate post-World War II years tended to suburbanize, come back to the city and reoccupy the city. So there's this essence of suburbanizing the central city. These are all mansions that are being built in the urban core now within Houston, to bring upper income, generally white professionals back into the city. And of course, these are familiar pressures. You have them closer to home in Hannibal Square. And I would like to thank Camille for this wonderful photo illustrating this. But it's very much something that we're experiencing across all major US cities. And we see these processes taking place across Asia and across Europe as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Igor. I think for a lot of people, that presentation lets them understand a little bit about the sort of global nature of the displacement that we're talking about when we say the word gentrification. But I do think that there's a question that probably leaps to mind for students and for everyone when they hear an expert like you talk about these questions. And one is about what is motivating some of this sort of displacement pressure. Is it purely policy policy actions that are doing this, or is it this sort of market question that is driving this? And I think at some level those things are connected, but I would like for you to sort of like articulate for people a little bit more about the nature of that relationship.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And initially, I think it was very much a cultural change that began to occur in the 50s and 60s. As we had massive suburbanization taking place, there were people that just did not like the outcome of the suburbs. There wasn't much activity. It was, clearly you had your little mega mansion, you had the large lot, but there were people that enjoyed the lifestyle, the urban lifestyle. And so initially in places like Georgetown, in places like Lincoln Park, you had a young middle class professionals who were a little more daring, start buying these houses, many with very unique historic features. So in fundamental ways, they were very different from the cookie cutter suburban home. And they began to appreciate that. And in fact, that's what leads, it's this movement that leads to historic preservation legislation in the 60s, at which point, it becomes part of policy. Governments begin to see that instead of just having the population suburbanize and let the urban cores deteriorate, that you can repopulate them, particularly with the wealthy. So I think there's, at some level, there's interest from government to reoccupy urban cores by a wealthier class. You know, what happens is if the assessed value of property increases, your tax rate can be maintained at relatively low rates, and you're economically competitive. So some governments have an interest in doing this at the expense of displacement. And this is, you see this in works of Andres Duani, you see this in the works of Richard Florida, and you see governments picking up on their work, all focused on the importance of renewing urban cores. And in general, dismissing the social dimension of, tearing apart communities, displacing residents, and all the pain that's associated with that, which is completely heartbreaking, right? I mean,
Right.
This is the essence of life. So it's both.
Right. So, I think it's important to recognize that the historical narrative about suburbanization, especially in the United States, is one that really does emphasize middle-class people leaving the urban core at some level to gain the benefits of having the ability to have a bigger house and doing things like this. And so this transformation that you're talking about that is driven by people with capital moving back in and displacing the people that they originally left behind, right? We have to think about this as urban ethnic populations, African Americans, Latinos. These are the people they left behind when they went to the suburbs, in part to sort of like live an American dream. And now they're coming back. And the implications for policy, of course, are very important. When you think about this transformation and its relationship to heritage, which I think is an important point that you're bringing to our attention when we start talking about heritage as a brunt against gentrification, there's an uneven power relationship that we have to be mindful of, right? This again goes back to a question of policy. And your presentation, you really talk about the idea that heritage itself is a tool in this sort of transformative matrix that is really targeting lower income people who don't necessarily have to be Black, but of course often are minorities of some type. And can you talk a little bit about how that language of heritage it sort of masks this economic transformation, this sort of profit taking at some level that you're discussing?
Absolutely, you make a really good point. On the one hand, heritage is considered something progressive, something positive, and in the context of suburbanization, where we were wiping out full city centers, whether to build more highways or just in urban renewal initiatives, people saw the historic preservation movement as something very progressive, very positive. But the underbelly was not discussed as extensively, which is that you're displacing populations. So you would have people organized, young urban professionals, particularly you see it in the Lincoln Park local conferences, where it's seen as an active initiative to replicate what is cool in New York City, what is cool in New Orleans. But nothing is said about the population that's actually losing their neighborhood, that's losing their homes. And this is one of the issues for decades. I have an article where a lot of this comes from, written with one of my PhD students, Ted Grefstar Nordbrock. And it's one of a handful of articles which tackles historic preservation as having a really ugly underbelly. You're displacing populations. You're displacing populations on a large scale. So it's interesting how we'll have certain movements that for decades can be marketed as progressive, as helping communities out, when in fact the social costs of these movements are extreme. And historic preservation is an example.
Right. So I think it's important for us to pause and let people understand that when we're talking about this, we're talking about a meta system. And at some level, one of the ways that these marginalized groups that are struggling with the impact of displacement have reacted is to turn toward some sort of collective action. And you can see the land trust and the light as that kind of collective action, actually growing from the 1960s as a kind of response to these systemic imbalances. So at some level, it's not necessarily individual actions that are always problematic, like the idea of historic preservation, especially in the context of some of the urban renewal destruction in historic places in urban areas in the 1960s, makes a lot of sense. As Igor says, it's progressive. But the nature of the marketplace does unfairly at some level put pressure on low income working class people in the system that we have. And so, that leads to the obvious question. I would often get this with my students. I'm sure you get this from your students, is, well, what are the kind of policy actions that can try to ensure a better outcome? And, there's no simple answer to that. The collective action represented by the land trust is at some level a grassroots effort. It's different from, say, a state-sponsored effort, although there are models of land trust that are very, closely tied to the state. So how would you answer that sort of like common question? Well, are there policy practices that might be helpful to blunt this process of displacement?
Definitely. And I think there are. And land trust, as you pointed out, is a great example. Here's the issue. In the US context, we rely a whole lot on private markets. And only about 1.5% to 2% of our housing is social housing. And that includes public housing. In a context like Canada, it's 5%. New York City has the most social housing, and it's about 5% of the city's social housing, whether public or, some type of subsidized housing.
So like rent control. When you say social housing, you mean something like rent control. Right.
Absolutely. Now you go to a place like Amsterdam, and it's 50%, right? You go to a place like Hong Kong, it's 50%. You go to a place like Singapore, and it's 85%, right? So in certain countries, they take a much more active role with alternatives outside the market housing options, like the land trust, right? And it completely changes the narrative, and it changes the housing pressure. What's interesting, and I've done work in Hong Kong, is when you have 50% public housing, and this was even before Hong Kong unified with China, when you have 50% public housing, you have some of the hottest real estate markets, some of the most expensive neighborhoods, and you have the lowest income groups living in those neighborhoods because 50% of housing is public housing. So it fundamentally changes how you think of housing, but it speaks to the importance of outside the market housing options. Coming from Canada, Canada is very proud that it's at 5%, right? But comparing it to Amsterdam, where it's 50%, for the city, and the country as a whole is around 35%, shows you that it's really important to have outside the market options. And around the world, they function. And New York shows us that it functions in even the US context. Having 5% of housing, whether in some form of social housing, whether rent control or subsidized co-ops, whatever might be the case. I think that's ultimately the answer.
Right. We're going to take our audience questions in a minute, but before we do that, we do have a short video about the work that the Hamilton Square Community Land Trust has done to help address these issues that Igor is talking about. And once we see that video, we'll come back and handle your questions. Stay tuned.
My dad came across the land trust and was like, you could buy a home down here for what you'll spend for just a single room studio up in Chicago. So at that point, Juan decided that he would just move down here. And being right out of college, I didn't have the savings to buy an on-market home. And then my dad kind of explained to me, this is probably a better option where if you just go with an apartment when you're ready to move, there's no equity or no return in moving, where at least this is a kind of a midway in between where you get both, the best of both worlds. So one of the benefits, or ended up being a benefit with the land trust home, was after we purchased the home, moved in, we got married, then the recession happened. We both ended up getting laid off from our job. And because of the affordability of the land trust home, we were able to maintain during that time, which was probably 4 years. We were unable to find a job within the field. That we were able to maintain. So that definitely ended up being one of the benefits, was being able to own a home and have a mortgage that we were still able to afford during those tough times.
It's definitely a good option if you don't have the savings or the cash available to go into a fee simple home, especially in current times where the market is just growing and fluctuating. And a lot of times, if you're looking at a land trust home, we are trying to develop new homes. So most times, if you qualify for the program, you're moving into a brand new home or a brand new townhome, hopefully soon. So I think that's one of the benefits. You're getting everything brand new warranty, and you're starting from scratch. With not necessarily another person's lived in and a house that may have had problems, may have not had problems. But this one, you're starting fresh.
So before I found the house that I purchased, I was living at home with my parents. I just graduated from college. I was, first year teacher with student loans and that kind of thing. And when I started looking at like housing outside of my parents' house, things were just pretty pricey, and there was basically just no way that I would live in like that particular neighborhood without the land trust. So yeah, it was a good way for me to kind of just make the progression from, college student to, working professional to owning my own house and being able to live in, the particular area that I live in, which is just really beautiful. And I like being a part of the land trust. I enjoy, getting to know my neighbors. I enjoy being a part of helping to, on the board, helping to provide the same thing for other people that I was fortunate enough and blessed enough to get myself. But once I established that, I really felt like the people at the land trust had my best interest in mind and weren't trying to make money off of me or trick me or trap me into something. That was really helpful. And not just, when I first bought my home, but going through things building a fence, right? Doing home improvements, going for a refinance. I've found the land trust to be a source of just guidance.
We learned through the process. We had a VA loan, and it's something that's unheard of. Normally, I guess land trusts are only 30 years, and this is 99 years, so they're normally not approved. It was a process, we went through it, but we take a lot of pride in being the first family to be able to break through that barrier. So now other families can do that, because, veterans, they deserve to buy any kind of home, so. What was appealing to me about it was the fact of where it was located. To me, where you grow up, it just opens doors for you. I grew up in Chicago in a high-rise. When I first moved into a home, it wasn't something that I was used to. I felt naked because I'm not used to, especially I have the corner lot, and I'm not used to that exposure. So I didn't think I wanted a home because in my mind, I thought that having a home meant I'm gonna have to mow the lawn. Things are gonna break. I'm gonna have to fix it. I love to travel and things, so I didn't want to be house poor. I really thought of owning a home as something that wasn't in the cards for me. I thought I would move from place to place to place, so I didn't want to own a home because of that. But when I got older and got married and had a kid, I realized I wanted to have a place to settle and call mine. There's that pride in it. When people, so I have a little corner lot, and I could do more. I'm getting there, but I have so many people, because I'm across the street from the park, stop and honk their horn and tell me, I love your little house, it's so cute. It's my favorite little house on the block. And it's something that you only get knowing you own it.
Well, I was and had been looking for a place to buy somewhere in the Winter Park area. And this was in 2013. And unfortunately, large investors had come in after the collapse in 2007, 2008, and they had bought up strings of houses, 30 houses at a time. And what I saw in the market, and I made offers on a couple of houses, needed an awful lot of work. And I mean, I was retired, and the idea of doing that work myself was no longer very attractive. Housing is a problem. It's gotten worse in my lifetime by far. People need to have decent housing, and they need to have a place for their children that's safe. And there's just so many places people are priced out. And something needs to be done about it. And I looked at the land trust and said, wow, that's a really good idea.
Well, it affected me because it allowed me to be able to stay in Winter Park. I was born and raised in Winter Park all of my life. And now that my mother has transitioned on, I am the only person from my family that lives in Winter Park other than my niece, but actually purchasing a home. And I wanted to be able to leave something for my children. And when the land trust deal opened up, I was excited that I got approved because I really didn't want to live anywhere else other than Winter Park. It's a beautiful city. And I say another benefit for me was just the mere fact that I could call it home. That I could have a place where I can lay my head and be safe and comfortable and live peacefully in my home.
So my mom was renting a house before we moved into our new home. It was in Winter Park. It was like around the corner, literally. I did get to choose my own room. It was really nice. It actually was decorated already. Like it had decorations in there and stuff like that. I don't know. I liked living in the home because it was brand new homes, obviously. And then we had a house of our own because we were renting previously before. So it felt good, and the community was nice. It's a little cul-de-sac. The neighbors were nice. And I want to move my own home, and I want a new home like my mom because it's like everything that's in there, anywhere in here, I know that I did it. Yes, I would love to own my own home one day. I actually have a realtor now, so that's my goal in 6 months. So my lease end at my current apartment.
That was a great video that sort of features some of the homeowners for the HSCLT, Hannibal Square Community Land Trust initials. Of course, one of the things that Igor's presentation sort of points to, and I think you can sort of see that in the stories of these renters, is that the economic marketplace can be very difficult for working class people and people limited means. The land trust is a way to be in the market. It's important to recognize, as Igor says, that there is a way that we can intercede. The land trust is one of those solutions. It's not the only solution. And social housing, as it were, as a bigger part of the housing market, offers a way to help more people. So the land trust is operating right now, and you can help it by donating, volunteering, and giving it support. I know that we're looking for questions from the audience, and as I sort of sort through the chat, we do have something from Facebook. Oh, what do you say to people, individual property owners, who don't see the cultural erasure resulting from gentrification convince them of alternatives to preserve culture and affordability? This is a really great question. Igor, how would you answer this question?
That's a really hard one. I mean, you see it with tensions nationally. There are some people who, recognize there were some people who were attracted to the suburbs because they were homogeneous spaces. And this is why I say it's a matter of suburbanizing the central city. Because again, there are people who want these homogeneous spaces that don't care to preserve the local culture, the ethnicity, the race of the community. It's simply not of interest. So it's about making claim that it's really important, given that we live in the United States, that it's really important to nurture diversity. We're many faces. I think this is what's really impressive about the US is you have opportunities that you normally do not have in other places, in other countries. And we should fight our hardest to make sure that everyone hears that diversity is important, that we have to nurture it, that there's a lot to be gained from that.
Right.
And there are populations that also recognize that. I mean, one of the things that made cities attractive since the 60s was that you could go to a Chinatown. You could go to Little Havana, right? You could go to Little Italy. So there are pockets of population that believe in that. And that's why they're attracted to the city. And there are pockets of population that simply are not.
Right. And I think there's another question, what can we do to prevent we in the community? And I think this is probably more about the legacy owners of property in these sort of heritage communities, their decision, which is a sort of market-based decision about selling their property. In the Hannibal Square context, I know from my own experience that there are families with very long histories in these spaces, but as children and distant relatives, as people grow older and pass away, and distant relatives don't have the same sort of emotional connection to the community, the idea of selling makes more sense. I do think it's important to think about how families approach property in terms of planning and estate planning and trusts, and how that might be very important. So, one answer to this question is, are you as a family, as a sort of unit, thinking about the next generation of people who might take advantage of your property? Are you sort of ensuring a kind of stability around that? And that might help in some cases, but in other cases, Igor's point, I think, is a very powerful one. And that is the question of, do you see the value in the kind of diversity that comes, the strength that comes from diversity? And this is, I think, one of the things that has been a part of the narrative that's facilitated displacement. You think about, Igor mentioned Richard, Florida. I think that's actually really a good example. The authenticity that you think about in sort of like urban areas and heritage communities that becomes a currency for people with capital to acquire and then magnify or distort as a part of their redevelopment practice. And so that's something to consider. So we do have, I think, another question.
But you can also see within this overall context why land trusts are so important, why it is so important to have these grassroots initiatives.
Right. Okay, we do have another question. Here we go. It's for you. Community redevelopment areas agencies starting in California have been replicated across the country. The enabling legislation uses slum and blight finding as the drive need for revitalization. How can we change that model so there's no longer representing planning for outcomes that do not represent the desire of long-term residents who are usually low income and B piles? Yo, that's a good question. BIPOC. Yeah.
Yeah. Once again, outside the market housing, I mean, that becomes critical, right? There's no way of getting away from that. And it's because you're competing against interests that have considerable amount of capital reinvestment, and they can mobilize quickly in the market. And having outside the market initiatives, grassroots initiatives, or even wider public policy is about the only way you can prevent that from happening.
Right. And I would say that this question of blight and which, you know, from a kind of academic policy standpoint is a very fuzzy term, right? What constitutes blight in reality in terms of like urban and planning policy is a very fuzzy term. And so it's important to recognize that fuzziness really hides some of these mechanisms around capital and capital movement that Igor is pointing to. So, you know, you can make the argument that, and I do mean this very seriously, that a global land market with capital that is very fluid is driving some displacement in communities like Orlando, because people are seeking to put their assets into acquire hard assets there that can weather uncertainty in the marketplace, and land is one of those hard assets, right? There's no if you look at the list of wealthiest people, you will know that almost all of them own tremendous amount of real estate, and there's a reason for that. That's part of their diversification portfolio. But because you have this sort of like, you know, highly mobile capital class, the consequences does flow through the entire housing market in particular, as different sort of like property taking happens across that housing market. I mean, that might seem a little extreme, but it is worth noting that we are talking about large marketplaces that we are experiencing at the local level, and it's important to understand that.
And I think that's a key issue. It's not a matter of it being extreme. You can think about how much money from Europe flows into Florida. You can think about how much money from Russia flows into Florida. In part, the reason condominiums are relatively more expensive than housing per square foot is because international investors will bury their money into condominiums. They're more easily maintained. So this becomes an issue. I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's the global aspect of people burying their investment in markets that they see as fairly stable, and major US cities are a classic example.
It is important to recognize also that I don't want to ignore the racialized nature of these narratives, because that's an important part. The reality is that the question of blight, the question of spaces that need to be revitalized, this is a long narrative in terms of our cultural communication in the United States, and failure to sort of like live up to the potentialities of the marketplace is always projected on people of color. It started with the Native Americans, with Puritans, and it continues to this very day. And that is not a joke. And so the challenge for us, I think, is to understand that the consequences of this are magnified at the very lowest end of the economic ladder, but they affect all working class, mid-level people. At some level, we're all being affected by this imbalance. So you can also think about the land trust as an avenue for, young professionals and professionals of very respectable um, um, careers who can't afford to get into the housing market. These could be teachers, these could be civil servants, these could be any sort of entry level person with a professional lifestyle. They're not generating the kind of income that allows them to get into the housing market, and they need these sort of alternative frameworks, be it something like the community land trust, be it a co-op, be it rent control, to allow them to get into the housing market, to allow them to actually become viable actors in the capital market, right? To build up the resources necessary for them to be in the housing market. And it really does take some sort of effort, be it collective effort or legislation that takes into account, as Igor points out, the nature of this sort of global marketplace for us to ensure equitable housing for people across the income spectrum, instead of just the people at the very top.
And that's why I threw in the example of New York City back in 2016 with the average condo price at over 3 million, right, for 800 square feet. I mean, you can think about it. How many of us could afford 750,000 as a down payment, right? And then if you have the 750,000 as a down payment, how many of us can afford $15,000 to $20,000 a month to support an 800 square foot, 850 square foot apartment condo, right? So it's not going to be accessible to teachers. It's not going to be accessible to professors. You might have many doctors, medical doctors, and lawyers that will not be able to enter these markets. And that's an interesting pattern that's happening. And this is something that I also mentioned in Lincoln Park, is that the mere millionaires, we're getting to a stage where the mere millionaires are being pushed out by the super millionaires, right? And this is the case of super gentrification. So making $1 million or $2 or having a property that's worth $1 million or $2 in Houston or in Lincoln Park, they'll buy properties for $1 million, $1.5 million, maybe even 2 properties next to each other, and build a $10, $15, $20 million mansion.
Right.
So these are layers of gentrification that have been taking place over time.
All right, I think Gigi is taking over.
Definitely not. I'm just joining the conversation. I love the fact that the two of you talked about the new face of affordable housing, because there's also the new face of homelessness. It's not the person that we typically think of when we think of someone who can't afford to buy their own home or is living in a hotel because they can't afford the rent because the rental prices have increased so much. So I think that was a really important point to bring up, is that it is a lot of our civil servants and a lot of our first responders, a lot of our teachers who are benefiting from the land trust model to be able to purchase a home in neighborhoods where they had been pushed out completely. So we did have a question about what can people do to prevent that gentrification from taking place in their neighborhoods?
That's a tough one. That's a really tough one. I think it's outside the market forces. You have to come back to that. The only cases around the world where I see affordable housing as being embedded in the market are examples where you'll have 30, 40, 50% of the housing is social housing. So community land trusts, rent control, these various tools that can be used. But that's the only option that I see. You'll hit places like Shanghai, and people are buying and selling $2.5 million condos, and yet teachers are making $20,000, $30,000 or $2,000-$3,000 a year, or $10,000 a year. So unless you have outside the market options, given the global nature of investment patterns, if you're in an attractive place, if you have a good climate, if you have if you have a beach, if you're an active entertainment center, you're going to be attractive to many investors around the world. And unless you have some type of social housing, some rent control, co-ops, public housing, it's very difficult to avoid it. I teach in Rome during summers, and the whole urban core of Rome is taken over by foreign investment. Generally, Romans do not live in the city. They live in suburbs way outside the city. And it's because Rome is an attractive place for foreign investors and for them people who have money to spend $1 million or 2 million euros on a condo is no big deal, but it prices the population from Rome outside the market.
So the short answer is legislation, and that legislation is supporting things like the land trust, but also cooperatives. I will always stress that it's important for African Americans to recognize the model of cooperative behavior that was very common in the late 19th century coming out of slavery is a model that can be updated and actually made more impactful because African Americans have the ability to take advantage of the marketplace by pooling resources, not just simply in local context, but also, think about how you might want to yourself pool your resources, create cooperatives that are dedicated to promoting property stability, promoting education, and promoting investment in other parts of the country, right? So you think about the places where African Americans could bring their money together to have a positive effect on the marketplace to help other African Americans, but also helping other working class people. And so these cooperative models, which have a long history in the black community, do have some important lessons to be learned. And again, yes, if you're a family that has property, there's a discussion you have to have about maintaining that property. What is your plan for that? Right. But at the end of the day, as Igor says, policy questions that involves being like an active citizen and voting, which is a real important question for us right now, and thinking about how the extra money with sometimes very tight family budgets might be put aside for these sort of cooperative endeavors. So supporting something like the land trust is important, and thinking about other kind of cooperatives that might be helping people in the community is also important.
And you can think, and if you reflect on the fact that 2% or less of all housing in the U.S. is some type of social housing, like co-ops, public housing, right? It shows you the scale of pressure that's exerted on the whole country, right? Even if you go to Canada, again, if you're at 5%, you have a little more protection, but you're essentially relying on the market, and we're just not as well organized as we should be. So it's amazing stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, the land trust has really been impactful in the communities that they have been able to assist, and the fact that they're now going outside of Hannibal Square to try to assist other additional communities is huge. So we're looking forward to the projects that we have on board. We've enjoyed your conversation tonight for sure. Is there any final thought that you want to share with the audience that's listening and the people that are going to be watching this on live, on recorded streams in the future?
Just keep doing what you're doing, and hopefully all friends out there, please donate, help them out. This is great.
Thank you.
What a great initiative. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, I agree with that. Ultimately, if you have concerns about affordable housing, you have concerns about the stability of heritage communities, it's supporting something like the land trust that's ultimately an immediate thing that you can do. And then there is always the question, as Igor points out, of supporting politicians and supporting policies that will make sure that you have access to affordable housing and at some level a host of other services that are necessary for a solid and productive life. And that's just the nature of the beast. We're still a democracy, so you kind of have to participate.
Agreed. Well, thank you both so much, gentlemen. It's been an awesome time talking to you today. We've had Julian in our presence for many, many years, but Dr. Igor, it was great to add your knowledge to the conversation and to talk on the broader basis of the gentrification that has taken place across the U.S. And so that people are aware, because awareness is a big part of the solution. The more we know, the more we can assist. So now I think we've charged our audience with not only participating with programs like the trust, but also getting their voices heard through different legislations and trying to help us on the political side to make sure that we can continue to have these types of developments that are created.
Thank you.
Thank
Awesome
you.
sauce. Well, I do want to congratulate the 3 winners that won Uber Eats cards, and they were Mika Caprice, Maribel Cordero, and Bob Cambrick. So congratulations, guys. We are reaching out to you to make sure that you send us your information so that we can send you your $50 Uber Eats card. I'm sorry. Yep. On behalf of City National Bank. And we also have a $100 gift card that we're giving out as a donation from the Orlando Regional Realtors Association Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And that prize is going to Alicia Massey. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in tonight. Let me make sure that I have all of my notes all spoken out to you. So we definitely have thanked our sponsors. We want to continue to thank Aura for participating. We want to definitely thank City National Bank for their presenting sponsorship of this event and for supporting us, not only this year, but in the past as well. And we look forward to continuing that relationship. Encourage you to check their banking products out. What we've decided is that the $250 Amazon gift card, we're going to extend that prize through the end of the month of June. So Hannibal Square Community Land Trust, their mission is to provide affordable housing for citizens and community members. And we are therefore going to take advantage of the fact that June is National Home Ownership Month and utilize that opportunity to spread the word about the programs that the trust is doing, the projects that we have coming up, and also to get that winner of the $250 gift card. So in order to participate, you would just go onto our website, which is hannibalsquareclt.org, and make a donation to the organization. And on July 1st, we will choose a winner and make sure that we reach out to them. But we do encourage you to volunteer, just like it says on the screen, to partner with us, to sponsor some of our programming. There are a lot of opportunities coming up in the future where you can participate. So I encourage you all to get involved. On behalf of everyone from Community Land Trust, we definitely want to thank Dr. Julian Chambis for hosting this event and Dr. Igor Vojnovic for leading our discussion. And thank all of you for tuning in. In between now and Juneteenth of next year, we hope to see you again, not only to celebrate Juneteenth, but also your partnership in our efforts to create more affordable housing in our areas. Good night, everybody.
Right.
Good night.